Vamos aqui iniciar mais uma Conferência Internacional do nosso sexto SIGPE. E, para fazer a mediação desse espaço, gostaria de chamar aqui o professor João Vitor Moretti, do Instituto de Pesquisa e Inteligência Esportiva.
Bom dia, pessoal.
E gostaria de convidar o professor Dr. Müller, da German Sport University.
Bom dia, pessoal. Eu vou fazer a apresentação do professor Till. O professor Till é pesquisador sênior do Instituto de Desenvolvimento Esportivo Europeu e Estudos de Lazer da Universidade Alemã do Esporte, doutor em Ciência Política pela Universidade de Bremen. Ele coordena o projeto All Stars, que é de boas práticas para o estilo de vida ativa em comunidades esportivas locais, que visa estabelecer e analisar políticas esportivas locais bem-sucedidas para aumentar a participação no esporte. Sua formação inclui uma graduação em Ciências Políticas, Línguas Eslavas e Sociologia pela Universidade de Bonn e com doutorado em Ciências Econômicas e Sociais pela Universidade de Bremen. Eu vou passar a palavra para o professor Till, que ele vai ter alguns minutos para contar um pouquinho da experiência dele lá. So, Till, you have a few minutes to do your presentation. And at the end, you guys can use the QR code to ask the questions. Then at the end, we will be selecting some that Till can answer.
Thank you very much. And as many have said before, but I will say it too, it's a pleasure and an honor and an unexpected honor to be invited to Brazil, to such a nice conference, to people who have so good data to present my little work. So, yes, and it was a great thing seeing so many people engaged in sports politics, sports administration, and actually taking an interest in how to improve the situation. For me, and I have to say for us, because I do this work together with my colleague Constanze, and Joao has met her and got to know her, but I wanted to mention her too. So we together work on a project about good practice for active lifestyles in local sports policies. And I want to show you a bit why we're doing this, where we see problems, and where we can probably propose some solutions. A few words about me, but I think you have heard everything. So I just had this slide in. What I wanted to mention at this point, because it was one of the places where I got to know Brazilian researchers first, is the Polish network that we have created some 10 years ago, maybe 8 years ago. And the first time, it's about sport politics and policies. It's a European network. But in the beginning, we also had Brazilian guests who presented a great project about data collection and sports intelligence. And that's where I got to go, the dear colleague Mesadri, the first time. And I was so impressed by what he did. So I wanted to mention that this Polish network is kind of our access towards an international conversation about sport policies. Now, what am I going to do? Sorry, I'm standing quite awkward, but I have to see my own slides. So what's the agenda? First, I want to motivate a bit why sports participation is an issue for sports politics. Mainly inspecting barriers, patterns, and structures that keep people from engaging in sport. And then I want to go into this All-Stars project, explain how we did the research, and show you somewhat following up on what Joe did yesterday, telling stories about good practices at the local level and trying to learn from these, learn from which practices they use, which networks are involved, and how this involves politics and change, and draw some conclusions. Now, why sports participation? Maybe at the very beginning, we can say we have had international conferences where sports ministers decided that access to sports is important for everybody, is a positive thing, should be realized, and that they take responsibility. There are people claiming, and for good reasons, that sports is a human right for everybody. But in addition to that, and maybe partly because of that, we are talking about health benefits. We have inactivity and sedentary behavior, and that can be cured or at least alleviated by an engagement in physical activity and sports. So public health is certainly an argument. We have proven social benefits, meaning sports can lead to better social integration, can lead to more democratic engagement. German sports clubs always say they are schools of democracy. A doubtful claim, but still it could be a context in which you learn something about engagement and democratic activity. It's one of the places where we can see volunteering and active participation in society, and somewhere these socialization processes have to happen. There is a feeling of belonging that comes with sport, and loneliness has become one of the major social risks that we're facing in society. So sport can contribute to this. And social capital with positive effects on economic and political access can be transmitted via sports. So very positive. In addition to that, skill creation, meaning educational effects of sports. Character building, motor skills, social skills, organizational skills, all that can be transmitted via sports. Now this is all very well, and in addition to that, it's fun, we enjoy it, it adds to the quality of life. So sports is a good thing. Probably nobody in the room had to be convinced about that, but I was just trying to mention it first. But why is it a problem? It's a problem because of unequal participation. The data shows, and I will show a bit of the data in the following few minutes, that sports participation varies a lot with gender, age, class, physical activity, refugee status, and a few more. So all these positive aspects of sports are not accessible for everybody, but is accessible only for a few people, and there is a structure in that. In addition to that, spatial differences between urban and rural areas exist. So we have a different distribution of clubs as such, of the varieties of sports that are accessible to people, and of the quality of the sports between cities and villages. And club sports, which is, you can hear that I'm German because I'll be talking about clubs a lot. Club sports is extremely and particularly unevenly distributed. So other forms of sports, let's say school-related sports, is much more evenly distributed. Club sports is much more selective. In addition to that, unequal access to politics. So if we have a system based on clubs, and these clubs are the lobby groups for sport policies, then these clubs have a strong incentive to cater to people who are already members in their clubs. And if this club membership is structured along class, age, physical ability, and so on, you can see there is a vicious cycle somewhat. Associations and federations are clubs of clubs. So within these, if you want to have it in a very unfair and exaggerated way, as soon as you go into the associations, it becomes a collection of aged, white, male, middle-class people. And that's certainly not a way to integrate people who are somehow excluded through age, class, and physical activity and refugee status. So the club system poses a problem. And sport autonomy, which is a structuring part of the German sport system, means these associations and federations decide a lot of things, more than the state does. And sport autonomy combined with a corporatist political system, meaning the sports federations and associations are directly integrated into the policy making in the state, means that they can lead huge parts of the budget into their ways of spending and into their own interest. Now, I'll show you part of this in statistics. The European Union does a regular survey on sporting activities, and you can see the distribution. So the inner pie is Germany, the outer pie is the EU as such. First thing you can see, sports activity is really unevenly distributed because 45% of the European Union population does not take part in sport at all. In Germany, it's 32%. That's a bit better than the average, but still, these 1/3 of the population does not benefit from all these positive aspects of sports. And seldom, or with some regularity, also is not so much. So many, many people do not engage in sport, even though it is so positive. How is that distributed? Well, we can see there is this difference between genders. So men are just much more active. I have to explain that. The number is who is not active. So the higher the number, the worse the situation. We can see a very common, and I think almost internationally recognized distribution along age groups. Young people are just much more active in sports than older people. And we can also see that according to social professional categories, sport has a strong middle class bias. It's just like that. If we look into the organizational form, clubs, from a German perspective at least. Next slide. So I've stayed with this one. Why don't people engage in sport? What are the barriers? Well, most of the barriers that we can influence at least is disability, pricing, or I don't like competitive activities. Now, what is a problem about sports clubs? You have to pay a membership fee. They usually engage in competitive sports, and they very rarely have something for people with disabilities. Now, the problem with I don't have the time and there's a lack of motivation, okay, that's not so much politically accessible as a problem. For people who engage in sport, we can see, I'm talking about Germany, I will show you a slide about how the German sports system is structured. And it's structured about sports clubs and sports associations. But what we can see is only 15% of the population really do sports in a sports clubs. Of the people who do sports, only 15% in a sports club. Most of them go to a park or outdoors or train at home. So investing a lot in sports clubs could be a failure in investment. And even if we look at different types of clubs, we can see health or fitness centers, so commercial offerings, seem to be almost as successful as sports clubs, even though they're more expensive. So the way in which the system is structured does not seem to tackle the problem of sports participation properly. Now, you have seen a modernized version of this slide when you have seen De Boscher's presentation, just the top part maybe. And it represents a European misconception of what sports policy is. And that's the pyramid of sports, because it only looks at sports clubs, regional federations, national federations, and so on. So in this picture about the German system, you see at the lowest level it's sports clubs and local sports federations building up to the national federation. On the other side, you have the governmental structures, federal ministry at the regional level, and local administration. Striking feature. These white arrows indicate power relations. There is no power relation between the federal ministry and the sports organization. There is no power relation between the regional level ministry and the regional sports federation. and there is no power relation between local administrations and sports clubs. Meaning, sports autonomy in the German system is really sports autonomy. Federations can do what they like. And if we have just established that federations usually cater to their members, that can be a problem. For us here, I will be looking at the local level because I think sports participation happens at the local level and is mostly structured and access is denied or allowed at this local level. Now, rephrasing the question while knowing everything that I've said is I'm asking myself, how do marginalized groups get access to the more or less closed shop of sports? And we try to tackle this in a way that we say, yeah, but there are initiatives, activities, projects, ongoing local level policies that address the problem, that seem to find ways. Let's take a look at these good practices and find out how they have managed to do that. So, identifying and analyzing successful local sport policies for an enhanced integration and participation of otherwise marginalized groups. And not only identifying them, but also finding out which political processes have led to the introduction of these programs and which networks are involved in keeping them going, implementing them. That's the All-Stars project, funded by the European Union, but everything I say will not be the responsibility of the European Union, but mine. Okay, how is the project structured? We have partners in 4 other countries, and we have partners in Poland, in Spain, in Norway, and in the Netherlands. And we have partnered up with the European Organization for Sports for All, ENGSO, especially with their youth part, and with the Dutch Organization of Municipalities. In the end, we want to compare these experiences from different countries. At the moment, I cannot say much about the other countries, so I will present a few examples from Germany. Case selection. Now, what have we had a look at? We had a look at a project. We have selected originally seven projects in Germany. We had to drop one because they were not answering anymore. So we tried to select instructive and innovative cases across Germany, and you see regional distribution is fairly even, and the size of the cities too. I will talk about the methodology here. So, how was case selection started? Qualitative sampling means we have not had any way of measuring good practice. We have partnered up with the organization of German cities and municipalities, and then have handed out an inquiry of which cities want to hand in good practice that they consider good and successful. Then we had a long list of possible practices, have judged them whether we like them, and have identified the ones that fit our needs best. Then we have selected along target groups. We wanted to have projects that target different marginalized groups. We wanted to have different city sizes because it's just a different thing to create a new project in a small town or in a big metropolis. And we wanted the regional distribution. That's how we got to these just shown cases. Data gathering was a combination of different methods. At first, we sent out a survey to have an idea of what is actually going on there, who is participating, which are the stakeholders, how does this practice work. When we identified good partners for interviews and which stakeholders should be interviewed. We had in-depth qualitative interviews, usually 3 to 5 in each of the cases, each of them usually going between 1 and 2 hours. Have analyzed these and then created a first idea about how this process works, and then brought this result back to these people there and did a participatory workshop with all the involved stakeholders. So in this form of having a participatory research workshop, we wanted to make sure that we actually understand how the subjective meaning and functioning of these practices is for the people involved. In the end, we analyzed these data sets in the sense of a reconstruction of decision-making over time. So which were the decisive moment in local sports policy to introduce this? Which were the context factors that contributed to it? And we wanted always to visualize networks that were involved in the creation and in the implementation of these projects, so that we could create a deeper understanding of individual cases and then compare them. Now, the first project that I want to talk about is in Berlin. Probably you have all heard of Berlin. It's the biggest city in Germany and the capital. And this first project is called Sport vernetzt. It means networked sport. And targets ethnic minority groups, socioeconomically disadvantaged groups, especially youngsters, children and youth. What they do is exercise to enhance general fitness, playful movement, and ball games. What you see here is this was originally created by Alba Berlin, which is a very successful professional basketball club. But they don't do specifically basketball. They don't invest in, let's say, talent selection or improvement or anything. This is totally remote from competitive sport. It is playful movement. It's activity. It's just integrating people into being active. And this project brings together sport clubs, especially the Alba Berlin Sport Club, but also other sport clubs, with schools and nurseries and childcare institutions in socially disadvantaged neighborhoods. So they go out of their club facilities, go to the schools, go to the neighborhoods, go into the childcare centers, and offer sports programs. When we look at the development of this project, so the initial phase, how did they produce it, connect it, then we can look at this first network that we created there. And you can see at the heart of it, you have Alba Berlin, a sports club. Now, probably if you followed my stumblings, then you have a moment of why is he telling this? Because this is a sports club. It's a sports club doing things that I just said sports clubs would never do. Well, they cater to people outside of the club. They don't charge for it. They just engage in social integration. And why do they do that? And that was our question too. And one of the major reasons why they do it are these connections to the Senate and the two Senate administrations that are engaging in social integration and local neighborhood development. So they don't do it with their own money. They do it, but they do it with funding from the city, which is important. So the city is engaged in this, but they partner up with the sports club to create a new field of activity, which is rare, but which is one way of bridging the two sectors. And they don't partner up mainly with the sports part of the city, but they partner up with the social integration part and with the educational sector in the city, which is also a very new and different thing. And what you can also see is that there is a thing that they call management of the quarter. So you have a program existing in this locality that tries to develop social integration locally and has people managing the connection and the cooperation of NGOs and others in this locality. They also play a major role in creating this network. Now, once we have this established, in the implementation phase, it can grow. And we still have this core of the city administration and the club at the heart of it, but now you can see tons of other institutions, schools from A to C, the university, youth center, other sports clubs, and all sorts of other. Kids Coordination is also a local NGO. So it then connects all the socially active parts in this locality into a project that brings all sorts of other people that would usually never go to a sports club into this activity and in creating access to sport. Now, tracing the process and finding out why could they do this in Berlin, we could see, okay, at the very beginning, we have an enhanced investment in social integration in one district of the town. Why do we have that? Because the situation in this part of the town was deteriorating. There was violence, there was conflict, all sorts of anomie would probably be the sociological term. So the city invested in developing there and also provided funding. And Alba could bring in their capacities to develop a sports project there. So the club could offer sport in the public sphere and cooperate with childcare. At the beginning, very small. But then city government enhances funding, 2021. COVID comes in as an external factor, making this problem of loneliness, of inactivity, and so on much more visible. So there is additional funding, but major occurrence, there is a violence summit in Berlin. The city government is under pressure because there was a violent New Year's Eve. At New Year's Eve, people went out and then things got out of hand and they looted shops and they had battles with the police. So the city government had to do something. And the city government did tons of things, but also said we have to invest in these kinds of projects. It's what we in the end will call a window of opportunity to establish something new. That allow, and since then, sport vernetzt grows and is well established. Second project, Sport im Park is sport in the park, inclusive. Again, in the end, sports clubs will play a role here, but in the beginning, the idea is very much some people don't go to sports clubs, especially older people, especially disabled people, and especially people who don't want to commit for paying a fee, for being part of this for at least a year, and so on. So the idea is if we want to get these people into a sports activity, then we have to have something with less of a commitment, without fee, and in a very easy outside setting. And that's what they do. They offer sports activities in the park. Everybody can come and join. And a variety of sports activities, all sorts of. The trick is that there is government funding for sports clubs to do this. So the sports clubs suddenly can say, okay, I don't have to charge a membership fee, I can send my coaches into a park and offer something. The very innovative part of the Berlin version of this, we can see this in several cities in Germany, the innovative part is to do it in an inclusive way, meaning having people with disabilities involved. There is a special offering for people with hearing impairments, for example, which is really something you rarely see, sports offerings where the instruction is done in sign language. But they have one organization that has also taken part in this. So when that started, we don't see much of sports clubs' involvement. The core of it is a government initiative. It's the Senate, which is the administration of Berlin, that introduces this program on the basis of additional funding from the regional sports association, because they also introduced some funding for such activities. And then we have a small network of people developing this, and one external factor, the hosting of the Special Olympics. So the whole topic of integrating people with disabilities came and was important only because there was the Special Olympics. And they had to offer something for the bid book of the Special Olympics. So they introduced this program. Once it was established, it could grow. But still, and that's different for this network than for the other one, this network is very centralized. So we have the city responsible for everything. Every participating club will have to apply with the city and get the grant for the project, and then can go into the green parts of Berlin and make their offer. So this is, let's say, a more hierarchical network that can also create these kinds of innovations. If you look at the process, we can see, okay, at the beginning is this regional sports association program that pushes for active spaces, and we have a single club that tries it out, but then the program is integrated into the city policy plan and is then funded and has an official continuation, is spread out to all the districts of the city and then integrated into the bid for the Special Olympics. Last example. Mülheim. It's a sports park. And it's a sports park that is different to other sports facilities in Germany because it's not run by a club, but run by the city, and it's open all day. You can go there anytime. Sometimes there's instruction, sometimes there's no instruction. You can do anything there, whatever you like with these facilities. But, and that's a difference to a usual playground, there is personnel there. There are people who take care of things, who prevent it from being torn down, and who offer instruction, if you want. And this sports park is very well integrated into the local structure. There are several schools around, there is a kindergarten next to it, and it is very well used by the population around it. So this integration into the social space, is what we call it, is probably the success behind this project. So multifunctional site, well situated in a town quarter, and made use of by schools, kindergartens, and sports clubs, but sports clubs here play a very minor role. Okay. How did that thing start? At the very beginning, we here have the sports service of the city of Mülheim, which is a government institution. There is no club involved. There are clubs, minor involvement of some clubs, but it's mainly the local authorities introducing it, the city of Mülheim, and buying into an architectural office that creates the space and creates the plan, and then it can be introduced and started. We will talk about why they did it. In the implementation, we still see the Mülheim Sports Service and the city of Mülheim are the two big spots here and here. But what comes into it and what made it possible to do it big is the Ministry for Health, Labor and Social Aspects in the region, meaning external funding always plays a role. But what we also have is all these networks then after introduction grow very much and they are able to integrate different sectors of society, meaning education, meaning social integration, meaning sometimes even commercial actors. So there is this, I'm sorry that this is in German, this means private enterprise. So there is a private enterprise involved with their own money and with the money of a foundation. And when we look at the process of introducing this, then we can see that at the very beginning, we have a participatory process, meaning there is a workshop by the Mülheim Sports Service where they invite the whole city public to discuss what to do with this place, because the place seemed to be rotten, lost, and unused. The localities seem to be socially disintegrating, and they want to collect ideas about how to develop this part of town. That's at the very beginning. Then after a year of discussion, they introduced this idea of researching other sports parks. They went with a group of citizens, they went to other places where there were sports parks, especially to the Netherlands, because the Netherlands are better developed in this particular field. And then they came back, created this investment package social neighborhood, and then started building. And could then introduce a second building phase with a renewed social integration program so that they could start the whole process in 2022. Now, what have we learned? These are only 3 of the originally 7 projects, but I think if I talk about one example after the other, it might be boring. So what we take from this is which qualities do these good practices have? Why do they have less barriers than other projects to integrate people who usually don't engage in sport? The first one is all these projects mostly engage in non-competitive activities. It's not sport for winning, it's not elite sport, nothing. There's no talent development here or anything. It's no pressure. That's probably the most important thing. The second, maybe even more important thing, no fees. You just don't pay. That makes things so much easier. We have data about parents of people in socioeconomic difficulties that don't send their kids to sports clubs even if the fees are refunded. Because they say, well, but I never know whether it works well, whether the refund really works out. There is this commitment, and in the end, I don't want to be stuck in this situation. So a no fee, no paperwork access to sports means people in socioeconomically difficult situations can actually do it and do it. Low commitment barriers, open spaces, open settings. You can go there, you can pass by, you can see it, and then you can take part. Very good. That brings people to engagement who usually don't. Closeness to living spaces, meaning an offer that makes it necessary to have a long trajectory there, have to have transfer, use public transport or anything, never good. Being close to the people, close to the school, close to the playground, close to the kindergarten, close to the park where elderly people sit anyway, and so on, that's very good. And last, by far not least, integration of stakeholders into the process of creating these offerings. You can see that with the last example very much. If you have this participatory process in the beginning, then probably the result will be much closer to the needs of the people. Which qualities do these networks have? What our analytical takeaway was, and still is spanning boundaries across political and organizational, departmental, or sectors. What do I mean with this? All these networks bring together more than only the sports administration. There is always either the integration department, or the health department, or the city development department, or social organizations that come from, let's say, organizations for refugees, organizations for migrant communities. Could be, there are some labor union clubs and so on that are involved in these projects. So if you span more of society and don't have this silo-style division of different policies, then it's possible to offer something that goes beyond what we originally see in the sports field. It's about participatory with respect to target groups. When we started this, we hoped to find even more participatory processes with respect to target groups. But the integration of target groups seems to be really important, but is something that most of these projects also struggle with. It's just not easy to integrate. A participatory political process is a long-term and difficult process, and not all the administrations manage to do that. And then every single workshop had a debate about the necessity of leadership. So if we see these centralized networks, then people discuss about the need to decentralize it, to make it less hierarchical. As soon as we have a network that is decentralized and has very low hierarchies, people discuss about leadership and about the need to have somebody responsible and take charge. So this question of, do we need leadership, do we need authority, or do we need much more decentralized and free structures? We cannot answer that, but we see that it's a topic that will be discussed in these cases. Politics. What do we learn about how new programs start? When we were looking into these cases, the first thing that you always encounter is they always talk about leaving old structures, and that the old path, the established institutions, the way things were run before, were hampering the ability to create something new. So path dependency as a problem, mainly because of power and legitimacy, meaning the incumbents, the clubs, the associations are in positions of power and can defend this, can defend their budgets, and so on. And the need to break this and the need to get something of the budget outside of clubs is always mentioned. Cross-sector networks can break these paths, meaning as the very easiest way is if you don't take the money from the sports budgets, but you take the money from the health budget, things are much easier because there's no sport club who says, but I can use it much better. Pre-existing practices are vital for the success, meaning we haven't found one single project where they did not build on pre-existing experience. The clubs or the NGOs or practitioners had engaged with the target group before. If they offer something for people with disabilities, they have worked with people with disabilities before and brought this experience into the new project, meaning new paths always built on old paths. Critical junctures. When can we change paths? We can change paths if something external shakes the system. That can be big, like a mega event, Special Olympics. Hosting the Special Olympics shakes up the local sports administration, absolutely. So there is new money, there are new problems, you have to solve this, and then you could maybe come with something new. The violent New Year's Eve, because your mayor, your responsible politician will come to your administration and say, we need something, come on, here. And COVID in a larger sense. But also in very small cases. We have one case where a local football club totally changed what they did before because they were losing membership and the city threatened to take away their pitch. So they said, you don't have any members anymore, your old pitch doesn't look good anymore. And in Germany, it's always the city who have the pitches, and the clubs rent them from the city. And the city said, for such a rundown club like you, you're out of that, we will build houses on your pitch. That made this club become very, very active to then build a new pitch, a modernized pitch, and an additional sports park around it to integrate everybody and to get funding for social integration and health and everything. So it changed this club completely because there was this crisis. So crisis can be critical juncture. And if we talk about how then do you bring this, your old practices, your knowledge, your cross-sector network, and your crisis situation into the political system, then we can, more or less, lead this into a multiple streams network, meaning what we need for a window of opportunity for change is there has to be some knowledge about the social problem. Cities have to have knowledge about low participation rates for some people, or about disintegration. This has to be something present in the political field. In addition to that, there must be allies within the political system. So some party or some politician or some influential lobby group must have an agenda that can be fused with such a sports program. The easiest way is usually health and integration. And there has to be a policy stream, meaning some activists, be it a club, be it a social movement from the locality, be it an individual person, has to come up with an idea to solve this problem, to offer this solution to the political system. If that comes together, then we can have a new decision and the introduction of innovative programs. Thank you.
So, thank you, Till, for your presentation. The QR code to the questions are at the front. You can send some questions. We already have a few ones in here. So, Caio Zirlis from Instituto Península sending you a question. Firstly, thanking you for your explanation. And he said in his question that we discussed a lot of data collection here in the seminar, but mostly in the public administration. And but we didn't discuss a lot of how physical activity and the general feeling of the population about sports in surveys, and how that the European Union survey can help these public policies on sports. And in the second part of the question, he asked us how as we saw the results, that one of the big ones was the lack of time to take part in sports. Here in Brazil, this is also an issue. And how do we can design some public policies to address this lack of time in regarding of participation in physical activity?
Wow. Yeah. I have no research-based answer for that. If I had, I could probably sell it for big money to government agencies. One of the more popular solutions for the time issue is bringing sports closer to the life worlds of people. A very traditional one is integrating sports into work. So if company sports sounds like a thing from the 50s and 60s, but there is a slight revival for that, and it makes a lot of sense. It has a downside too. It means you're in a bigger, stable company. And in modern gig economies, many people are not part of bigger companies. So it also caters to middle classes. But that certainly allows for more sports participation. The other one is most sports offerings in clubs, at least, are fairly strict in their timing, meaning you have your training or your training session at 1 or 2 times per week, and you have your match on the weekend, and you have to make do with that. That's why fitness clubs are so popular, because they can have their sign out 24/7, and you can go on your spinning wheel for whenever you want at 3 in the morning. So this can solve some of the problems. If you have more flexible timing in your sports settings, it makes things easier. The general aspect that people are overworked and have working times that don't allow for anything else is not a thing that the sports sector can solve. I guess that's much more for the trade unions.
Thank you. We had a question from Felipe Costa from Brasilia University. Is in the same way, but looking at the universities, saying that students doesn't have time to do activities and to participate in sports, mostly because of the university. It consumes a lot. So what do you think about the role of the universities in that? How they can help students to be more active in physical activities? Is it similar to what you just said about the companies or things like that?
Coming from a sports university, our situation is different. Meaning, my students don't come to my classes, they go sports. So the problem is just the other way around. And in general universities, maybe the situation is different in that sense that our universities are not very strict about attendance and time, leaving quite some time for other activities. On the other hand, most students work, so their time consumption is mostly into somehow making ends meet. What universities do, and I think they do it here and they do it in most European countries, is offer university sports, which is, at least in some aspects, a very helpful thing because it's very cheap. Access to university sports is really cheap, and that makes it much easier to take part. And most students take part in some way.
This was our final question. So thank you, Till, for your presentation. You brought us something that we are discussing in these past days about the networks, about how entities can work together to improve sport. So thank you for that. And I will pass the word to Elvis.
Muito obrigado, pessoal, por essa bonita e tão louvável conferência, mais uma que nós tivemos. Pedimos a vocês que se juntem aqui para a gente fazer um registro. Em seguida, o professor Tio também receberá também nossa pequena homenagem com certificado e uma pequena lembrança nossa do IPE. Uma salva de palmas.